Well, we'll have to see. We have to see what Mr. Assange, who has maintained a high public profile even during his years of incarceration and being in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, chooses to do. How much of a public figure he chooses to be. We have to see what the press's response around the world is towards the outcome of this case, because this is an incomplete ending. And by that I mean that even if you close off Julian Assange's personal situation by finding him guilty on one charge of publication of classified US documents, and he has served 5 years in prison for that charge, it doesn't resolve the wider issues around freedom of the press, around national security and the public interest, because there never was a proper trial about this, a trial that should have been held years ago. And secondly, it doesn't resolve where WikiLeaks is now. In 2010, I was a big supporter of WikiLeaks when it published information in the public interest. 14 years later, WikiLeaks stands accused of not really publishing information, but publishing disinformation, including helping Russia interfere in the 2016 US election and helping Russia's activities in Syria and in Ukraine. So, that's a big change from where we were in 2010, when I think it justifiably was putting out documents about America's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So after such a long saga here, what implications does this outcome have for press freedom in the United States? Is there any clarity here?
I have to emphasize there isn't, because what's going to happen is that those people who are detractors of Julian Assange will continue to say that what he did in 2010, the largest leak ever of U.S. classified documents, bigger than the Pentagon Papers in the 1970s. They'll say that was wrong, that it was a fundamental threat to lies and security. Those people who are defenders of Julian Assange, as you've heard, will say, no, this was necessary. This was necessary to expose what his lawyers called war crimes. And we have no clarity on that, because the full facts around that case were never heard. And they were never heard in part because the U.S. government failed to bring this to a trial for many years. And then, of course, for years, because Julian Assange's lawyers fought extradition for that trial in the United States. So no clarity on where the lines over freedom in the press exist. Here we are in this new social media age.
Let's talk a bit about that press conference which WikiLeaks just held a short time ago. What did you make of those questions that were essentially being shut down regarding these leaked documents and Russia?
Julian Assange's lawyers do not want to say anything beyond the specifics of the documents that were published in 2010, because they, quite rightly, the documents that were hacked by Russia, stolen, and then published by WikiLeaks, possibly in collaboration with the Russians in 2016, it was outside the bounds of the case, but it also looks bad for WikiLeaks, and it looks bad for Julian Assange. Because Julian Assange, who was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London at that time, was part of that operation to leak those documents. He bragged about it. And that was not the only WikiLeaks operation. They also published Russian disinformation in subsequent years to cover up chemical attacks in Syria. So again, the lawyers wanted to stay on the facts of what happened 14 years ago, but they do not want to venture in where WikiLeaks has been in the past 8 or 9 years.
Now, since he's landed, I mean, he's barely had time to sort of gather his thoughts at this stage, but people are already talking about whether a possible pardon for him is in the cards here. What do you make of this? Is there any chance that he could receive a full pardon here? I believe that when Donald Trump was president, he even floated the idea of giving him a pardon.
Well, certainly Stella Assange was calling for that pardon today, calling for a public campaign for that pardon. But the significant piece of information is that Assange's lawyers said in February 2020 that Julian Assange had been offered a pardon by Trump's representatives. Of course, Trump was then president, if Assange would point away from Russia and to some other supposed source for the documents that were released in 2016 to undermine Hillary Clinton. Now, that offer didn't come off while Trump was president. But if Donald Trump becomes president in January 2025, the possibility of Julian Assange making a deal for a pardon, that comes back to the fore.
What do you make of the timing of this situation here? The end of this, one end of this legal saga here. What do you make of the timing of this happening? Just before a US election, while various other things are afoot throughout the world. Is there sort of a timing issue here as well?
Still Assange was emphasizing that there was another appeal against Assange's extradition in a couple of weeks, indicating maybe, the U.S. thought it would lose that case. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the fundamental here is that from the side of the U.S. government, this case had dragged on too long, that they were suffering harm to their public image, especially from defenders of Assange saying he had been unjustly imprisoned for so long in the UK. And from the side of Assange and his lawyers, if he was convicted in the United States, if he ever was extradited and faced trial, he could face a much longer prison sentence, another 10 or 15 years in prison. And they wanted to make sure that didn't happen. So for both sides, this was a convenience of timing to finally close this off.
And finally, Professor, what would be Julian Assange's next move here? Obviously, he'll want to gather his thoughts and he'll want to sort of figure out what his next move is going to be. But what's he likely to do next? Is there any way to tell?
It would take me many, many years to get inside Julian Assange's head. He is not necessarily predictable. He's not necessarily what you might call a person who does the expected. What I would say is the parameters in terms of what he might do is that Julian Assange has been under a lot of pressure throughout his detention. There'll be a lot of pressure, I think, upon him to try to maintain a low profile. On the other hand, Julian Assange is a very confident man in himself and has liked publicity in the past. So I do think we'll be seeing him again. I'm just not sure how soon that will be.
And the eyes of the world will no doubt be watching. Professor Scott Lucas from EA Worldview, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.